Hey you guys, it's me, Megan, and today I'm going to show you how I use mixed media when I color in my new Funky Florals coloring book. So I'll be using alcohol markers, watercolor markers, and colored pencils as I create on one page. So if you'd like to learn how to create vibrant, dimensional, gorgeous works of art when you color, then come along and watch me do it. So I'm going to be working in my Funky Florals art coloring book. This was just released by Better Day Books, and there are 60 pages in here that I drew. So you've got a lot to color. And the other cool thing about this book is I've included some instructional pages. So I've got this coloring sequence, combining media, which is what I'll be showing you in this video, working with gel pens, alcohol markers, water-based markers, and colored pencils. So it's more than just your typical coloring book. So my favorite water-based markers to use are these Tombow dual brush pens. They have a soft, larger brush tip on one end, and then a firm, fine tip on the other end. So these are great for large areas and details. And that's the same with my Cali Art alcohol markers. So they have a broad tip. This is a chisel tip, so it's not a brush tip. And then a fine tip as well. And these Cali Art markers, they're pretty good. They're a more affordable alcohol marker, which is why I got them. And they come in a nice big set with a lot of colors. Lastly, I splurge on my colored pencils because Prismacolor colored pencils are the best, and I really don't use any other colored pencil. So I'll be using these as well. Okay, so getting started here. First, I want to show you that because I'll be working with alcohol markers, I've put down several sheets of paper underneath because my alcohol markers are going to have such a strong bleed through. Let me show you what I mean. This was a page that I did alcohol markers with on one side, and you can see that it bleeds right through the back of the paper really bad. So if you're going to be working with alcohol markers, definitely put some scrap paper underneath. The other thing I like to do is clip down my page so that I can be sure that those pages are going to stay in place. So I'm going to start with alcohol markers, coloring in the base of this large flower. So when I use alcohol markers and I'm trying to create a blend, I make sure that I have several values of the same color handy and ready to go because I want to work rather quickly so that I can blend before my colors start to dry. So I'm going to start off with my darkest value here in this petal. So when I'm coloring, I love dimension. I really like to push the dark and light values and give things a lot of three-dimensional quality to it. So I'm always thinking about where my light source is going to be. So anytime I have a petal that's either underneath or below another petal, that's where I'm going to have my darkest shadows. So for this petal, starting near the center, I'm keeping it nice and dark, and then I'm extending this dark area up here where this petal is behind the other one. Now before that has a chance to dry, I'm getting out a value that's just a little bit lighter, and I'm going to go right on top and kind of color over that darker pink so that it's starting to blend into this more mid-tone pink. Now, before that has a chance to dry, I'm going to grab the next value and do the same thing. So I will go right on top, really focusing on that area where the two colors are meeting so that I can get that blend really, really smooth. And then lastly, I'll get out the lightest one that I have and extend that all the way to the edge. Okay, so you can see this is a pretty good smooth blend. Now, like I was saying about shading, I want to push back any areas that are underneath something else. So this little fold in the petal is creating that for me. So I'm just putting in this slightly darker value here to create the beginning of a shadow. And then I'll take my super light one again and go right on top and just kind of blend these together. Also going to put this one here on the actual folds. Now, this is just my base coat. The reason I like to use different media when I color is because I think that they all work together really well. So I'm going to be coming back to each of these petals with colored pencils to really make them come to life. So what I'm doing now is just a base coat. Now I will go into every petal of this first flower with that same process. And I'm going to work one petal at a time because, like I said, I want to work a little bit quickly to avoid my markers having a chance to totally dry. That's going to help me in the end have a smoother blend. So I've put in that darkest value. I'm grabbing my next one, fading this out. And then after this, I will grab the next lighter one. So just like I did with that first petal is how I'm going to go about addressing this entire flower. So these alcohol markers also come with a colorless blender. Now that is a little bit deceiving in the name because it doesn't really help with blending as much as it does with just pulling up some color. So when I extended this lightest value all the way to the edge, if I want that to fade out to even lighter, I can take my colorless blender along the edge here, and it's just going to lift a little bit of that color back off of the page. You can't tell it when it's still wet because it is, when the paper is wet, everything's looking a little darker than it is, but when it dries, you'll be able to see how that lifts the color right off of there. Okay, so step one in this flower is done. I have gone into every petal with the same technique, really trying to emphasize that dimension. So we're going to be coming back to this guy later. First, though, I want to show you how I would do the same approach with my water-based markers. Now, there's a couple reasons why I might decide to use water-based markers when I've started with alcohol markers. And for this flower, that reason is simply that I just don't like the purples that the Cali Art gives you in the set. And so I want something a lot more vibrant. However, sometimes I just want a bit more of a washy look. Now, the good thing about water-based markers is that because they are water-based, when they dry, you can go right back on top and wet them again, and they will blend pretty seamlessly together. Now, the bad thing about water-based markers is that because they are wet, they can, when you put too much of it down, tend to pull up some of your paper. Now what you'll see I'm doing is I'm going into all the areas of this petal where I want my darkest darks. So it's the same thought as my last flower, except this time I don't have to necessarily go one petal at a time because it's not really an issue if this dries up or not. And you'll see why in a second. So I'm going into all these areas where my petal is behind another one, just starting to bring out those areas where I want to have my darkest shadows. Okay, so there are two ways that I could blend using my Tombow dual brush pens. The first is by taking a similar approach to what I did with the alcohol markers. So right now I'm taking more of a mid-tone purple and I'm going right on top of my darker purple and then kind of pulling away. So I'm getting a nice blend through here. However, what's really cool about the water-based markers is that you can create a blend from a very dark to a very light using just one color. So I've got out a plastic bag here. This is just a little Ziploc. And I've also got my colorless blender. Now this is truly a blender. It's actually going to blend the colors, unlike the alcohol markers where it's lifting them more. So with just this one dark purple and my colorless blender, I'm going to take this petal all the way from the dark to almost white. So what I'll do is I'll take my dark purple and I'm going to lay some of it down here on my plastic bag. Then I'll take the colorless blender and I'm going to pick up some of that color. Then I will start going right up against that darkest area and pull away from it. Now, the more I use this colorless blender, the color is going to come off of it, and that's going to cause it to fade and get lighter and lighter and lighter. So you can see I'm going from very dark all the way to this super light. But one thing you'll also note is that it's starting to pull up that paper. So you're seeing some of that happen right here, where you see the little spots. That's where too much water is starting to almost damage the paper. Now, this is going to be much more noticeable while my markers are wet. So it does not actually tend to bother me, especially because I know I'm going to be coming back with my colored pencils, going over a lot of stuff. But some of you perfectionists out there, that might bother you. So it's just something you need to think about when you're deciding which method you want to use for shading. Okay, so here they are side by side. I've got my alcohol-based marker Floral. It's got a bit more of a smooth, clean blend next to my water-based marker Floral, which is a bit washier, almost a little bit messier feeling. I like to use both of these supplies when I create because I like that contrast. And I also know that I'm going to be going back with colored pencils to really push some values back further and give these more dimension. But I can also use my colored pencils to clean things up if I feel like the blend needs to be smoother or something feels a little bit too messy. So I'm going to go into each flower in this entire page with this step, and I'll fast forward and show you that when I'm done. Okay, so here is where it's at. I went into each flower with that first layer. You can see this one and these I did with the water-based markers, and then the rest, these yellow and these purple and this pink, I did with the alcohol markers. I have not gone into the centers yet. I'm gonna come back to that, but before I do that, I am gonna go into the leaves. All right, so moving on to the leaves, I have the same approach. I'm thinking about dimension. So where my leaves are coming out from underneath my flowers or where they're underneath another leaf, that's where I'm going to be putting in my darkest values and then fading that out. So I'm starting here with my alcohol markers, as you can see, and I'm doing that same technique where I've got my darkest value and now I'm fading into more of a mid-tone, and then I have my lightest value handy. So there's leaf number 1, and this is just a basic leaf. I have some leaves that are kind of crazy and funky. So this guy here that has polka dots, I'm going to have to think about this in a little bit of a different way. But it's pretty similar. I'm just going to be trying to work around my polka dots. So I have to be a little bit more careful as I put in this first darker value, and then I will fade out away. Then when I go back eventually with the polka dots, I can add a different color, I can keep them all light. I'll have a lot of different options for what I want to do with them. And I could always just go over them with the green, and then maybe when I get my colored pencils out, I'll kind of switch things up and change the color a little bit when I go on top. So I will go ahead and just fill in this one here on top of the little polka dots so that we can see an example of that when I get to the colored pencils. You can see on this one, I was talking and I just forgot to get out my lighter value, but oh well. So it just fades from that dark to the mid-tone. This one though, I will remember. And it's up to you. I mean, if you want to go into each of these little sections that I've created on the leaf with different colors, go for it. I do that a lot right now, just trying to show you how I approach this with the shading techniques. I'm kind of trying to simplify it a little bit. But I can always go back in here. So I could always make this a deeper green or this one a deeper green, do something in my polka dots. But for now, I'm just going to keep this guy simple. So I've got out my water-based markers now, my Tombow dual brush pen, and I'll show you an example of the same idea, keeping those darker values coming out from under the flowers where it would be in a shadow, and then fading out as I come away from the flower. So I've just got this kind of mid-tone green. I'm going to lay that down, then I will use my colorless blender to fade that out. And I'm working around the polka dots, as you can see. Sometimes I work around them, sometimes I go right over them. Just depends on, honestly, it just depends on my mood. Do I feel like being more careful in the moment, or do I just want to get down some color and come back later with the colored pencils to mix things up? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do this base layer now in all of my leaves, mixing it up between my alcohol markers and my water-based markers. So I'll skip ahead and show you guys once I've gotten to that point. So now I've been putting in a bit of color to the center of my flowers. So here for my last step before I get to the colored pencils, I've just been putting in a little bit of color into the center of my flowers. I typically don't get too detailed with this. Sometimes if it's a larger area like you see I'm coloring in right now, I will try to do a bit more shading. But for the most part, I know I'm about to get my colored pencils out, which is where I'm going to really push that shading. So I don't typically do too much here at this step with the center of the flowers. Usually I'm just kind of filling in little shapes with color. So here in this one, I've started putting in the blue in that shape, and then I'll just go ahead through the rest of this and put in another area of flat blue, just a lighter one. So I'll go ahead and address all of the centers that I haven't so far, and then we'll be ready to jump into the step where the magic is really going to happen. All right, so I have made it to my favorite step in this whole process, and that is where I have out my colored pencils. And I am going to really emphasize the dimension. So right now you can see I've started in my yellow flower, and I'm using just a brown, a nice brown, kind of go with this brownish yellow and orange that I've got in this flower. And I am just really trying to emphasize my shadows. So as you can see here, I'm working in this petal, and this petal is behind this one, and it's behind this one. And so I am letting my darkest areas go right up against that other petal, and then just kind of fade out. And you can see already how much dimension this is giving these petals. So it's really important when you're trying to get that three-dimensional look that you use a full range of values. So I want to make sure that I'm going all the way to my darkest darks, which is basically almost black, to the lightest of lights, which would be my whites and almost whites, especially like you see in my pink flower. So this yellow flower, it's not only pushed back behind the pink and this purplish one, but then it's also layered on top of this purple one. So after I put in my shadows here in the flower where it's pushed back behind these two, then I'm going to need to go into this flower and push it back behind my yellow one. So I tend to jump around a lot. I don't try to stay in one area and get it 100%. I like to kind of build up the piece all at the same pace. But I am going to try to get this one flower as finished as I can for this lesson's sake. So I'm just going through the whole flower, finding anywhere where I think I can push an area back and allow those petals on top to stand out. So this yellow one is already really coming to life. I'm going to take a break from it and come down here into this guy. I've switched over to a nice dark blue, but I think I'm actually going to use this warm gray and go in and start pushing this flower back first. So I'm trying to push it back underneath the yellow flower, and then I'll be going into the individual petals within the flower to create some dimension in those as well. The key to having these look like nice shadows is to fade out softly. So I'm going very dark up against the yellow flower, and then as I come away and my shadow's fading, I'm reducing the pressure on my colored pencil. And that's helping me just fade right out and blend into the purples that I already have down in this flower. So now I will go into the individual petals with the same thing. And then this approach is exactly what I'm going to do with my leaves now as well. So anywhere I have these leaves that are peeking out from behind a flower, I want to take that shading that I already started with my markers and push it even further. So I'm going really dark up against the outside of my pink flower and then just reducing to almost hardly any pressure at all as I fade this out. And now this guy is on top of him. So I'm going to go in here, the same idea, press down nice and hard to get a nice deep shadow, and then reduce the pressure as I come away, softening the edges and making the shadow look as realistic as it can for a crazy, funky, non-realistic floral design. So this is basically my process. Before I'm going to really go into one flower or one petal or leaf at a time and build up more and more detail, I'm going to go through the entire piece with this approach to the shading. So anywhere I can push a leaf or a petal or a flower back by doing this simple shading technique, that's what I'm going to do first. So I'm going to go through this entire thing now, and anywhere I see that I need to add that shading to bring out the dimension, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, and now I am pretty sure that I have gotten into every area with that technique, just trying to push the flowers back, push the leaves back, push any petals back. So now what's left is to go into each flower and leaf and really bring out some detail. I'm going to start here in my bright out in front pink flower. And I'm going to try to give this first petal that I'm working on the tiniest bit of dimension, making it look almost rounded. So I'm starting with a little bit of color towards the center. Then as I get, towards the center of the flower, but not the center of the petal, but the inside of the petal. And then as I come out towards the center, I'm making it really light and then slowly adding a little more shading in. So I'm going to do this in each of the little sections. And it's going to be subtle, but it's all the subtle little details working together that are going to make this look super cool. So now I'm layering on this lighter pink. And this is one thing that I love about the Prismacolor colored pencils, is that you can layer on top of one another and you can take that whole textured colored pencil look away. I love the smoothness of the markers and how that looks. So with the Prismacolor colored pencils, you can take their colorless blender and go right on top, and that's going to smooth things out and blend things together and take away that texture from the colored pencils. So I'm also going to give this petal here on top the same sort of treatment, giving it a little bit of a curved, rounded look. So leaving this center part and just adding a tiny bit of shading and color in on the edges of my petal and towards the inside. Then I can take my lighter pink, go right on top, and then my colorless blender and get rid of that texture, smooth it out. And there you go. I'm going to step away from that pink flower. I'll be coming back to it, but I'm not going to show you every single thing I do because that would take forever. So I will go back to that and show you when I'm done. But right now I'm going into my yellow flower here. I'm going to bring out the shadows here that I hadn't done yet, where I have the folds. And then I'm going to use more of an orangier color to go into some of these little sections that I've made with the lines. I'm just following the contour of these lines with the orange and letting it fade out as I get to the top. So we talked about these leaves that have the little designs in them. So now I can come back with a colored pencil and fill in my little dots. I can do that in this one as well. You see, I already filled in some of this one with the marker, and then I was like, oh wait, I told them I was coming back to this with colored pencil, so I stopped. And then if I want to smooth that out, of course, take the blender and go right on top of these areas and get rid of that texture. In this type of leaf, where I've given the leaf more, I don't want to say realistic, because I am fully aware that my flowers are not really realistic, but when I haven't done a fun design, but I've done more of just the veins through the leaf, I can go along with my colored pencil and kind of use those as guides on where to put some shading and just bring this one to life a little bit more. So I've gone down the center of it with a nice dark turquoisey green, kind of fading out as I go. And then I can even just start to fill in some of these little areas. Another thing I love to do when I'm adding this detail is bring in some pops of other color. So this flower is a violet purple flower, kind of on the dull side. And I'm going in with some bright blue and then a little bit of this magenta. And I'm just mixing up what's going on inside. So I'll put those just kind of little streaks of it all through this one petal. And then I can also just take my white colored pencil and go on top in some areas too and pull out a little bit of highlights. The white colored pencil is also a cool way to kind of blend your colors and get rid of that texture. Just keep in mind, of course, that it is going to lighten that area because it's white, obviously. So now I'm going to speed it up and just show you how I bounce around and really try to address every single petal and leaf in this whole piece. I also like to get out sometimes the contrasting or opposite color to bring out even more depth. So here in my yellow, I'm using purple for both the shadow and for some pops of color in the highlights. And then I have so many little details that I've added in when I was drawing. So I try not to ignore those either. So whether it's the center of flowers like you see me doing here, or just some of the designs that I have inside the petals and the leaves, like these little polka dots, I try to pay attention to all the little things. And there is my finished piece. If you made it this far, you must be really into coloring. So I hope you enjoyed this little peek at how I like to use alcohol markers, water-based markers, and colored pencils when I color. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you check out my other work at my website, makewells.com, and follow me on Instagram at makewells. See you guys.